Animal Farm by George Orwell. Episode 9. Narrated by Wormhole Podcast. After the battle for the windmill, life on Animal Farm grew harder than ever. The animals had won, but at a terrible cost, and now they faced another bitter winter with even less food than before. Boxer, the great workhorse, had injured his hoof in the battle, but he refused to rest, not even for a single day. Every evening he would quietly tell Clover that his hoof troubled him greatly. She treated it with herbs she had chewed into poultices, begging him to work less hard. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she warned him. But Boxer had only one dream left: to see the windmill completed before his retirement. You see, when Animal Farm was first created, the animals had promised themselves a better life. Retirement pensions had been agreed upon: 5 pounds of corn daily for horses, hay in winter, and perhaps an apple on holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday, his retirement age, was due in late summer. He imagined peaceful days spent learning to read, finally mastering the alphabet he had struggled with for so long. But while Boxer dreamed of retirement, the reality of the farm was growing darker. Rations were cut again and again, except for the pigs and their guard dogs. Squealer, the pigs' spokesman, always had an explanation. He called the cuts readjustments, never reductions, and insisted things were far better than in the old days under Farmer Jones. He read out long lists of figures, proving they had more oats, more hay, better water than ever before. The animals believed him, mostly because they could barely remember how things used to be. Besides, they told themselves, at least they were free now. They were no longer slaves to humans. That had to count for something. Meanwhile, Napoleon had fathered 31 piglets with the farm's sows. A special schoolroom was being built just for them, and they were forbidden from playing with the other young animals. New rules appeared constantly. All other animals must now step aside when a pig approached on the path, and pigs were given the privilege of wearing green ribbons on Sundays. The farm needed money badly, so more and more was sold off. The hens had to give up 600 eggs a week, barely leaving enough to hatch new chicks. Rations were cut in December, then cut again in February. The lanterns in the animals' stalls were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough. In fact, they were putting on weight. One afternoon, a delicious smell drifted across the yard from the old brew house. The animals wondered if a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared. That Sunday, it was announced that all barley would now be reserved for the pigs. Soon the news leaked out. Every pig was now receiving a daily ration of beer. Napoleon himself got half a gallon, always served in a fancy soup tureen that had once belonged to Farmer Jones. To make up for the hardships, Napoleon invented something called spontaneous demonstrations. Once a week, the animals would march around the farm in military formation, celebrating their glorious revolution. Boxer and Clover always carried a green banner between them, reading, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." There were poems in Napoleon's honor, speeches by Squealer, and sometimes the gun was fired in celebration. If anyone complained about the marching, the sheep would drown them out with bleating. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. But somehow, these celebrations helped the animals forget their empty bellies, at least for a while. In April, Animal Farm was declared a republic, and they needed to elect a president. There was only one candidate. Napoleon was elected unanimously. On that same day, new revelations about Snowball were announced. The pig who had been expelled years ago was now said to have fought alongside the humans all along, leading their forces with the cry, "Long live humanity!" That summer, Moses the Raven returned to the farm after years away. He still told the same stories about Sugar Candy Mountain, a paradise where animals would rest forever after death. Up there, just beyond the clouds, he promised, there were fields of clover and linseed cake growing on hedges. Many of the tired, hungry animals believed him. After all, wasn't it right that a better world should exist somewhere? The pigs called his stories lies, yet they let Moses stay on the farm. They even gave him a daily allowance of beer, asking nothing in return. After his hoof healed, Boxer worked harder than ever before. All the animals worked like slaves that year, rebuilding the windmill and building the schoolhouse for the young pigs. Sometimes the long hours on so little food were almost unbearable. But Boxer never faltered, never complained. Nothing he said or did showed that his strength was failing. But his hide had lost its shine, and his great haunches seemed to have shrunk. The others said he would pick up when the spring grass came. But spring came, and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes, pulling boulders up the quarry slope, it seemed only his willpower kept him standing. His lips would form the words, "I will work harder," but he had no voice left to speak them. Clover and Benjamin begged him to take care of himself, but Boxer wouldn't listen. His 12th birthday was approaching, and he wanted to leave a good store of stone before his retirement. Then, late one summer evening, a terrible rumor spread across the farm. Something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to haul stone to the windmill. 2 pigeons came racing back with the news. Boxer had fallen and couldn't get up. Half the animals on the farm rushed to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer, between the shafts of his cart, his neck stretched out, unable even to lift his head. His eyes were glazed, and his sides were matted with sweat. Clover dropped to her knees beside him, crying his name. "It is my lung," Boxer whispered. "It does not matter. I think you will be able to finish the windmill without me. There is a good store of stone accumulated." "I had only another month to go anyway," he said. "I had been looking forward to my retirement. Perhaps Benjamin and I could have retired together and been companions." Someone ran to tell Squealer what had happened. The pig arrived full of sympathy and concern, announcing that Napoleon was making arrangements to send Boxer to the hospital in town. The animals felt uneasy about this. No animal except Molly and Snowball had ever left the farm. But Squealer convinced them that the veterinary surgeon could help Boxer better than anyone on the farm could. With difficulty, Boxer was helped to his feet and limped back to his stall. Clover and Benjamin prepared a good bed of straw for him there. For 2 days, Boxer rested in his stall, while Clover gave him medicine twice a day. In the evenings, she lay beside him and talked softly, while Benjamin kept the flies away. Boxer said he wasn't sorry for what had happened. If he recovered, he still had 3 good years ahead of him, and he would finally have time to learn the rest of the alphabet. But Clover and Benjamin could only visit after working hours. And it was in the middle of the day when the van came to take Boxer away. The animals were working in the fields when they saw Benjamin running toward them. It was the first time anyone had ever seen the old donkey gallop. "Quick, quick!" he shouted. "They're taking Boxer away!" Without waiting for orders, all the animals raced back to the farm buildings. There in the yard stood a large closed van with a sly-looking man on the driver's seat. Boxer's stall was empty. The animals crowded around the van, calling out their goodbyes. But Benjamin pushed through them, shouting, "Fools! Do you not see what is written on the side of that van?" In a deadly silence, Benjamin read the words aloud. Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler. They are taking Boxer to the knackers. A cry of horror burst from all the animals. At that moment, the man whipped his horses and the van began to move. Clover forced her way to the front and tried to run after the van. "Boxer!" she cried. "Get out! They're taking you to your death!" All the animals took up the cry. "Get out, Boxer! Get out!" And then Boxer's face appeared at the small window at the back of the van. Then his face disappeared, and there came a tremendous sound of drumming hooves from inside. Boxer was trying to kick his way out. Once, a few kicks from Boxer's hooves would have smashed the van to matchwood, but his strength had left him, and the drumming of hooves grew fainter and died away. The animals begged the horses pulling the van to stop, crying out, "Don't take your own brother to his death!" But those horses were too ignorant to understand, and they only quickened their pace. Someone thought to close the gate, but it was too late. The van passed through and disappeared down the road. Boxer was never seen again. 3 days later, Squealer announced that Boxer had died peacefully in the hospital. He claimed to have been at Boxer's bedside during his final hours. Boxer's last words, Squealer said, were, "Forward, comrades! Long live Animal Farm! Long live Comrade Napoleon! Napoleon is always right." Those were his very last words. Then Squealer addressed the rumor about the van. Some animals, he said indignantly, had jumped to the foolish conclusion that Boxer was being sent to the knackers. The explanation, he said, was simple. The van had once belonged to the knacker, but was now owned by the veterinary surgeon. The old name simply hadn't been painted out yet. That was how the mistake had arisen. The animals were enormously relieved to hear this. Squealer went on to describe the expensive medicines Napoleon had paid for, and their sorrow was tempered by the thought that at least Boxer had died happy. Napoleon appeared the following Sunday to deliver a speech in Boxer's honor. He reminded everyone of Boxer's 2 favorite sayings, "I will work harder," and "Napoleon is always right." "These maxims," Napoleon said, "every animal would do well to adopt as their own." The pigs announced they would hold a memorial banquet in Boxer's honor. On the day of the banquet, a grocer's van delivered a large wooden crate to the farmhouse. That night, the sounds of singing and quarreling came from within, followed by a tremendous crash of glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse until noon the next day, and the word went round that from somewhere the pigs had acquired the money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. And so Boxer, the strongest and most loyal worker Animal Farm had ever known, was gone. He had given everything he had to the revolution, worked until his body broke, and dreamed of a retirement he would never see. The pigs had sold him for whiskey money and told the animals comforting lies about veterinarians and hospital beds. And the animals believed them, because believing was easier than facing the terrible truth. "I will work harder," Boxer had always said, "Napoleon is always right." But in the end, all his work and all his loyalty meant nothing to those who had promised to take care of him. This is the story of how power corrupts, and how those in charge can betray the very creatures who trust them most. And it is the story of Boxer, who deserved so much better than the end he received.